everybody, in today's video we're going to learn one of the most important skills you could possibly learn if you want to improvise great solos, which is how to solo with arpeggios of triads. So let's dive right into it. So we're going to be taking a look at the simplest chord progression that you could pretty much come up with. It is a C major chord to a G major chord, just going back and forth. So this chord progression would be in the key of C major, and it's the 1 chord and the 5 chord. The reason I chose this chord progression is because 1 and 5 sort of represents the basic function of most chord progressions, which is to have tension and resolution. So the 1 chord, C major, is our chord that's going to sound very resolved. That's sort of like our home base. And then we go to the 5 chord, which is our sort of tense chord. And then it goes back to 1. So 1, 5, 1. So we're going to learn how to solo over this progression today. So the first thing that we need to know is we need to know how to play the arpeggios of each of these chords. So we should know all of the notes in the C major chord and all of the notes in the G major chord all over the entire guitar fretboard. We're going to be going over that in this lesson today, but if you need more help with that, check out this video right here. So we're going to start with actually just taking one little position and finding the notes in these chords right in that position. So as you see here on screen, we got 2 diagrams. The top one is a C major triad. So we got this C, E, G, C, E, G, starting from the 8th fret of the 6th string. And then right next to it, we actually wanted to find the closest G major triad. Now, why is this so important that the G major triad had to actually be close to the C major triad? It's because we want to start to learn how to use something called voice leading. And we will see how this works in a couple of minutes here. But let's just take a look at the diagram first. So look at that bottom diagram. This is a G major triad. Now the notes in that triad are actually G, B, and D, but we're starting from a B note here on the 6th string because that is actually the closest note in the G major chord to that C that was on the 6th string. So if you notice, there's a C on the 6th string on the top diagram, and now that just moved down 1 fret to the 7th fret on B. So here's our G major triad. Now take a screenshot of that, practice that. It's not really hard to pick it up, but let's play through that a couple times. So C major, and then G major. So actually what we're going to do is we're going to play a solo just with those 2 triad shapes over this backing track that you're going to hear right now. So the backing track is going to be exactly the chord progression that I just mentioned. It's going to be C major to G major. So it's going to start off with a C major chord, and it's going to hold for 4 bars, okay? 4 bars, and then 4 bars of G major. So let's hear what it sounds like to play a solo with these 2 triad shapes. So I'm on the C major chord. Now the G major. Back to C. Now G. So really, that's how simple this is, guys. The idea is that instead of using scales to play our solos, we're actually going to use only these arpeggio notes. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing this because, as you can hear, all of those notes sound really solid on each of those chords. Why? Well, because they're simply the notes in the chord, right? How could I play a note that's in the chord and have it not sound good? It's impossible. And that's where we usually run into trouble, where if I say play C major scale over this backing track, some of the notes are actually going to sound weird from C major scale. And a lot of people get confused by that. They're like, how is that possible? I'm playing the right scale. I know I'm playing all the right notes. I'm not messing it up at all, but some of the notes still sound weird. That's why, because in the C major scale, some of those notes are going to sound different on the C major chord versus on the G major chord. And this gets even expanded more when you're talking about a chord progression that has more chords in it, like A minor and F major and all these different chords that are available in any key. So with that being said, work on that position. Now we're going to move on to the next position here. So right here, this is the exact same thing now, but now we're starting from higher up on the neck. We're starting with an inversion of C major, okay? So we're starting with an E. Remember the C, E, and G in the C major chord. So we're starting E here in the 12th fret. Again, these are all just the same notes, but they're played in a different place in the fretboard, right? And the closest G major to that is going to be right here. Now, again, the way that we figure out where the closest G major chord is whenever we have a C major is we actually need to look at how each of the notes moves from one chord to another. Let's look at that a little bit more, actually. So if you notice, look at the 6th string on both diagrams. The 6th string in the top diagram has an E on the 12th fret, and that E goes down to D on the 10th fret in the bottom diagram. So actually, this is a rule you should remember. No matter what, when we go from C to G, that E is going to move down a whole step. So that E note is going to move down a whole step to D. Now, there's a G note in both of these chords. So that G note always stays the same. Look at the 5th string in both diagrams. They both have G. See, that's pretty cool. That's what we call a common tone. So that G stays there because the C major chord has C, E, and G in it, and the G major chord has G, B, D in it. So the only other note that's different is if you take a look at the 4th string, there's a C note there on the top diagram, the C major diagram, and on the bottom diagram, there's a B there. So the C moves down a half step to B. This happens all the time. No matter where we have a C, the closest note in the G chord is going to be that B. So this is what we call a voice leading line too. So a lot of times when you're playing your solo, you want to highlight that. So at the moment when the C major switches to the G major, play that. Play C going down to B. It'll sound really cool. So let's go through those shapes one more time. And now let's hear what it sounds like in a solo. I'm going to try to highlight what I just said. So I'll either go from E to D when the chord switches, so E down a whole step to D, or I'll go from C, a C note, down to B when the chord switches. So we're on C. I just went from E down to D. There you go. That was B up to C to go back to the C major chord. That was E down to D from the C major to the G major. Going back to C major. There we go, another voice leading line, B up to C. that it really helps us to transition smoothly between each of these triad shapes when we can see, oh, look, I don't have to just start at the bottom of the pattern every time. You look for the notes that change between one chord and the next chord. So the C always moves down a half step to B, and the E always moves down a half step to D. And that's actually how we just make our G major chord. And then, of course, the opposite is true when we're going back to the C chord. So the G stays the same, the B moves up a half step to C, and then the D moves up a whole step to E. So we're actually almost done doing this all over the whole entire neck. Now we're going to do the last position, which is going to be all the way up here, starting from the 15th fret. Now, this position can as well be done an octave lower, starting from the 3rd fret, using some open strings. And I'll show you that real quick too. So here we got our C major chord, starting with a G, okay? And then you notice the lowest note on the 6th string in both of these diagrams is a G, because that's our common tone between the two chords, right? So we always start in G. So look, all the C's move down a half step to B, and all of the E's moves down a whole step to D. So now this is our G major chord. By the way, one little cool exercise that's good to do is go up the C major and then go down the G major, and vice versa. So up the C major, down the G major. Okay, cool. Let's hear what a solo sounds like in this position. We got to get all of the entire fretboard. That's one of the most important things, guys, about becoming the best guitar player you can be, is when you learn an idea, whether it's a chord or a lick or whatever, try to find as many places in the fretboard as you possibly can. That's one thing that we have to work on. Lots of other instrumentalists don't have to, but there's some trade-offs involved with that. We also get to transpose things pretty easily, unlike other instruments. But we got to learn everywhere on the fretboard to be as complete of a player as we possibly can be. That was the E moving down to D as the transition between the chords. B moved up to C. Okay, cool. So you might be wondering now, Adam, this sounds okay, but it doesn't really sound like the best solo in the entire world, right? So I know that. The reason that we want to learn how to play a solo with these triads is not because I want you to say, okay, I'm going to play solos only with triads for the rest of my life. No. The cool thing is that after you spend a lot of time doing this with the triads, you're going to see that now, once we add back in all our major scale notes, you're going to start to look at things in a little bit different way. So that brings us to the last part of this video, which is we're going to now combine all those triads that we just worked on with the C major scale. So now if you look at the top diagram, it actually shows all of the C major triads in green, and all the black notes are all the rest of the notes from the C major scale that we can play over this backing track. And then the bottom is the same thing, but all the G major triad notes are highlighted. So for example, if I just look at the green C major triad starting from the 8th fret of the 6th string, I know it can be kind of hard to pick them out, but look at the green notes. So I'm going to play that. This is actually the same C major triad we started the video with. Right next to that triad, I have all these other notes that I can play. So I have this C here on the 8th fret, but there's also a B on the 7th fret. There's an A on the 5th fret. There's a D on the 5th fret of the 5th string. There's right next to the E, there's an F actually. So that F note is one that we want to be careful with. And actually, pretty much all of the black notes we want to be careful with when we're on each of these chords. So on the C major chord, all of those green notes, those are great notes to land on. The whole idea is we want to use them as target notes. So now we can use all of our notes from the scale, and we can actually use any note we want, by the way. And the idea is that no matter what happens, we can always see where those triads are and make sure we land on those triad notes. Now, this part can kind of be challenging, but again, this is the skill really that you need to develop in order to be super duper confident soloing on any progression. If you can make sure you can target those chord tones, you're always going to be playing on the money every single time. So let's check out what it sounds like to solo like this. So now I can use any of the triads that I want, but I can also use the C major scale. What I'm going to do first is actually alternate between just using the triads and using the scale. And then I'm going to start to blend them together, and I'll guide you through that a little bit. So I'm going to start off with just triads first. C major scale. So there, look, I just landed. We just went back to the C major chord. I landed right on one of the chord tones, E. This is all just C major scale notes. To a triad. Always ending on one of the chord tones. I can use whatever notes I want, but just make sure I land on the chord tone. Oh, there I used a note that wasn't in the C major scale. So check this out now. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play whatever notes I want and then land on a chord tone. Let's see how it sounds. So really everything I just did there was literally just playing the C major scale, kind of random notes, and then making sure I landed my last note of the phrase, landing on one of the chord tones. So when I was on the C major, I made sure I landed on either a C, E, or a G. And then when I was in the G major chord, I made sure I landed on either a G, B, or a D. It's really that simple, guys. If you know how to do this, then it unlocks you to be able to play whatever notes you want. And it doesn't matter because you always know how to bring it back to one of those awesome target chord tones. So I really hope that this video helped you all. I'm going to put the backing track for this and the chord diagrams on Patreon. So if you're interested in using this to practice, then go to the Patreon and pick it up for yourself. And until next time, listen, learn, and jam.